Honourable the President.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we willingly acknowledge you as the Supreme Being, most gracious and most merciful. Look down, we beseech you, on us who are members of this Senate, and deign to assist us in the duties that we have to perform on behalf of our beloved country of Trinidad and Tobago. Open our eyes to see the truth, and help us to accept it with all its implications into our lives. Direct us, O Lord, in our deliberations, so that setting aside private interests, unwholesome prejudices, and personal affections, we may treat all matters set before us with honesty, courage, and conviction. Through all we say and do in this Senate, may we give glory and honor to your holy name, inspire confidence in our fellow citizens, and make a positive contribution to the peace and prosperity of our nation. Amen.
Announcements by the President.
Honourable Senators, I have granted leave of absence to Senator the Honourable Dennis Moses, Senator the Honourable Robert Lehunt, and Senator the Honourable Rohan Sinanan, all of whom are out of the country, and Senator Sophia Choate, SC, who is ill. Honourable Senators, I have received the following correspondence from Her Excellency the President, Paula May Weeks. The Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, by Her Excellency Paula May Weeks, President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. To Mr. Augustus Thomas. Whereas Senator the Honourable Dennis Moses is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Augustus Thomas, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 27th of March 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator the Honourable Dennis Moses. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 23rd day of March 2018. To Ms. Ayana Lieber Lewis. Whereas Senator the Honourable Robert Lehunt is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Ayana Lieber Lewis, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 27th of March 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator the Honourable Robert Lehunt. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 26th day of March 2018. To Ms. Alicia Romano. Whereas Senator the Honourable Rohan Sinanan is incapable of performing his duties as a senator by reason of his absence from Trinidad and Tobago. Now, therefore, I, Paula May Weeks, President as aforesaid, acting in accordance with the advice of the Prime Minister in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(a) and Section 44(4)(a) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Alicia Romano, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 27th of March 2018 and continuing during the absence from Trinidad and Tobago of the said Senator the Honourable Rohan Sinanan. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 23rd day of March 2018. To Pastor Clive Dottin, whereas Senator Sophia Choate SC is incapable of performing her duties as a senator by reason of illness, I, Paula May Weeks, President, as aforesaid, in exercise of the power vested in me by Section 44(1)(b) and Section 44(4)(c) of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, do hereby appoint you, Pastor Clive Dottin, to be temporarily a member of the Senate with effect from the 27th of March 2018 and continuing during the absence of Senator Sophia Choate SC by reason of illness. Given under my hand and the seal of the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago at the office of the President St. Anne's this 27th day of March 2018. Honorable Senators, Senators are required to take the oath.
I, Augustus Thomas, having been appointed a member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, upon which I am about to enter.
I, Ayanna Lewis, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I'm about to enter.
I, Alicia Romano, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
I, Clive Dottin, having been appointed a Member of Parliament, do swear by Almighty God that I will bear true faith and allegiance to Trinidad and Tobago, will uphold the Constitution and the law, and will conscientiously and impartially discharge the responsibilities to the people of Trinidad and Tobago upon which I am about to enter.
Honourable Senators, permit me to welcome back to the Chamber today Parliamentary Secretary, the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, Senator Singh.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives. The Land Adjudication Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017 in the name of the Attorney General. The Land Tribunal Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017 in the name of the Attorney General. The State Suits Limitation Number 2 Bill 2017 in the name of the Attorney General. Papers.
Minister in the Ministry of Finance.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honour to lay on the table the following papers as listed on the order paper and the supplemental order paper in the name of the Minister of Finance. The consolidated financial statements of Caribbean Airlines Limited for the financial year ended December 31, 2014, and the reports of the Auditor General of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago on the financial statements of the Land Settlement Agency for the years ended September 30, 2010 and 2011. Thank you, Madam President.
Reports from committees.
Senator Roach.
Madam President, I have the honour to present the following report as listed on the order paper in my name. The 9th report of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the Tobago House of Assembly. 3rd session, 2017-2018. 11th Parliament on an inquiry into certain aspects of the operations of the Chaguaramas Development Authority, CDA. Thank you.
Urgent questions.
Senator Mark.
Thank you, Madam President. To the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Family Services, can the Minister indicate what action is being taken to assist the 19 persons who have been left homeless as a result of recent fires in St. Madeleine and Diego Martin?
Leader Local Government.
Thank you, Madam President. It's still a mix-up there, don't worry. Madam President, the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services is one of the second responders responsible for providing support to needy families and individuals in crisis and emergency situations or who are victims of natural or man-made disasters. The fire victims in St. Madeleine were visited by officers of both the National Family Services and the Social Welfare Divisions. 3 of the 4 affected families were assessed, and 2 families were provided with food support, while 1 family is expected to return with documents for processing by the ministry today. The next family will be visited by social welfare officers today, and an assessment will be completed subsequently. The families were also offered psychosocial support and counseling services by the National Family Services Division. With respect to the fire in Diego Martin, the ministry sought and made contact with one of the victims, for which a telephone number was provided, but was unsuccessful, and will continue to make attempts to make contact with the affected families to provide the necessary support. The services available to victims of natural and man-made disasters from the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services upon completion of needs assessment are as follows. Household items up to 10,000, clothing grant 1,000 per person, school supplies 1,000 per child attending secondary and 700 a child attending primary. House repairs up to 20,000. House rental grant of 2,500 per month for an initial period of 3 months if alternative accommodation is required. This may be extended a further 3 months at 2,500 per month, dependent on the need of the family and subject to further assessment. Emergency food support and counseling services provided by the National Family Services Division. Accordingly, Madam President, all the affected families will be visited by officers of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services.
Time is up. Senator Ma. Next question, Senator Ma.
To the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities, what is being done to ensure an immediate resumption of a potable water supply to the residents of Four Roads, Stamina.
Minister of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Madam President, the disruption of the water supply is caused by land slippage, which has affected the distribution main in that area. WASA is at work to reroute the distribution main, and we expect to have the water supply restored by Wednesday, tomorrow afternoon. Thank you very much.
Next question, Senator Mark.
To the Honourable Minister of National Security. Can the Minister indicate what action is being taken to address complaints from members of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force about poor food quality being provided to them as a result of a reduction in their budgetary allocation?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, allow me to indicate that within the Ministry of National Security, every effort is being made to ensure that not only members of Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force, but all agencies in the state are provided with balanced meals with the following cost-cutting measures. One issue to state is that the Chief of Defence Staff himself has in fact asked his formation commanders to pay particular attention to the preparation of meals. He's also instructed them to look at priority of purchase with respect to ingredients. Also, standardization of menus, centralizing of purchasing for food for further benefit for economies of scale, Madam President. And this, of course, understanding the economic situation in which we live in today. As Minister of National Security, I am in fact having discussions with the Minister of Finance with respect to additional releases to satisfy this requirement, Madam President.
Senator Mark.
Could the Minister confirm newspaper reports that our soldiers and members of the Defence Force are now being subjected to the consumption of pancake and leftover tunas? Could you confirm that with this Honourable House?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, I cannot confirm that.
Senator Mark.
Can the Honourable Minister indicate when action will be taken to ensure that balanced meals are provided or will be provided to the men and women of the Trinidad and Tobago Defence Force? When would that occur, Mr. Minister?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, the Chief of Defence Staff has informed me that all efforts are being made to provide balanced meals to the members of the Defence Force as we speak.
Next question, Senator Mark. Senator Hussain.
Thank you very much, Madam President. To the Minister of Sport and Youth Affairs, given recent reports that the taxpayers have been made to cover the cost of a $150,000 settlement in the Ministry of Sport and Youth Affairs, can the Minister indicate the basis for this settlement?
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, a trade dispute was filed before the Industrial Court by a union naming the Ministry of Sports and the Chief Personnel Officer as responding parties. The matter involved a claim for a dismissal that was not in accordance with good industrial relation practices. This matter was settled based on advice from external counsel, the settlement being $150,000 TT.
Senator Hussain.
Madam President, could the Minister say what is the government and ministry policy as it relates to settlements for claims regarding wrongful dismissal and sexual harassment under the guise of non-disclosure agreements using taxpayers' funds?
I will not allow that question. Next question, Senator Hussain.
Madam President, could the Minister categorically deny or confirm, yes or no, that the Minister of Sport is the person who is named?
Senator Hussain, I will not allow that question. Next question, Senator Richards.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Madam President. To the Minister of National Security, given the recent video showing someone dressed in police uniform allegedly engaging in an illegal drug transaction, can the Minister indicate whether the authenticity of the video and the identity of the persons involved have been ascertained?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, yes, the authenticity of the video has been ascertained.
Senator Richards.
Can the Minister indicate if one of the persons involved is a present member of the TT Police Service?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, yes.
Senator Richards.
Can the Minister indicate a timeline on when an investigation into this incident can be expected?
Minister of National Security.
Madam President, I cannot give a timeline. The matter is being dealt by the Commissioner of Police, who has in fact referred the matter to the Professional Standards Bureau.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, we ask for deferral of questions 62, 64, and 65, as the Minister of Finance is not in the jurisdiction, and we will be answering questions number 88, 89, and 90.
Madam President, may I seek your indulgence?
Before questions 62, 64, and 65 are deferred for 2 weeks. Senator Mark.
Madam President, because the Minister of Finance is not in the jurisdiction, does it mean that there's nobody in the government, Madam President, who is competent to answer this question, Madam President?
Leader of Government Business.
I was just trying to be transparent with the Honourable Senator, but I could have easily said we asked for 2 weeks deferral, and that is within the standard.
Madam President, may I, as I'm on my legs, may I ask you to ask my honourable colleague, the Leader of Government Business, who gave you and this honourable Senate an undertaking last week that he will report to you and this honourable House on the question that has been languishing on the order paper for a considerable period of time.
Madam President, with the humblest of apologies, I seek your indulgence as I was informed by the Ministry of Public Administration and Communications that they are presently seeking a legal opinion with regards the issue of answering this question as they are concerned of confidentiality of the parties involved. The matter has been referred to the Solicitor General for her advice.
Madam President, I would like you to rule on this matter. Once a matter has been approved by the President and the Parliament constitute an arm of the state under the Constitution, no ministry which is a subsidiary of this Parliament and the Constitution can tell this Parliament they are not answering the question and they are now seeking a legal opinion. That is unacceptable, inexcusable. Madam President, I seek your intervention and your ruling and your direction on this matter. This is unacceptable.
Senator Mark, I did not hear that there is a refusal to answer the question. You may recall that Standing Order 27, I think, has already been invoked, and therefore that standing order, the steps that have been taken pursuant to that standing order are still outstanding, and I await the response from the relevant ministry.
May I ask, Madam President, how soon?
No, Senator Mark, let's leave it at that. And there are steps that have, the standing order is there, and I understand the steps that have to be taken. Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 88 to the Minister of Education. Having regard to the
No, Senator, you just have to call out the number.
Yes.
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Grief counseling sessions have been conducted with the staff and students of the St. Francois Alcy Primary School after the trauma experienced by students and teachers as a result of the murder of their teacher and a colleague. Student Support Services Division personnel, including behavioral specialists, clinical psychologists, school social workers, and guidance officers, immediately provided counseling services to the school community. These services took the form of an initial assessment with the principal and staff, to identify student needs and the provision of post-trauma interventions for all classes, to provide psychological and emotional support for all students, and individual grief counseling for identified students. With regard to the teaching staff, the Employee Assistance Program, EAP, has provided psychological first aid to teachers. These actions are to ensure that teachers can be emotionally strengthened to return to their normal duties. In response to the second part, monitoring of students by the staff of the Student Support Services Division is ongoing. Arrangements have also been made for students who presented elevated levels of distress to continue to receive individual interventions. The Employee Assistance Program, in consultation with school administration, will provide follow-up sessions for teachers to ensure teachers have received adequate support. Thank you.
Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President. Just arising out of the answer from the Minister with regards to the second part of the question, are the counseling sessions still ongoing? This incident took place about 3 weeks ago. So is it still ongoing?
Minister.
Or is it finished?
Madam President, counseling sessions were held for the first 2 weeks, and as the need arises, counseling sessions will continue.
Senator Amin.
Madam President, I don't know if you will allow me, but there was a similar incident in another school regarding a teacher in Tobago.
No.
I don't know if
it has to be specific to this question.
Okay.
Next question, Senator Amin.
Question number 89 to the Minister of Health.
Leader of Government Business.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, as of February 24, 2018, there were 34 suspected cases of hand, foot, and mouth disease. The following steps have been taken to treat with and prevent the spread of the disease. As of February 2018, physician sensitization and retraining at the primary and secondary healthcare levels were conducted in all the county medical offices of health, the CMOH. As focal points, these officers were trained in routine outbreak investigation for communicable diseases, and with the principal medical officers are equipped and, if required, to increase the alert and awareness at the national level. Further, these CMOH focal points are mandated to ensure effective transfer of knowledge, competencies, and standardized information in the diagnosis and treatment of the disease to health workers at various healthcare institutions. The development of public education campaigns through the Public Education Subcommittee on Vector-borne and Communicable Diseases, where several tools were developed for immediate alert and preemptive measures, were sent to members of the medical fraternity, both in the public and private sectors, advising of how to diagnose, treat, and prevent suspected cases of hand, foot, and mouth disease. Several groups were targeted, including schools, PTAs, and children through different forms of media, including talk show programs, social media, and newspapers. The public education campaign highlighted that while hand, foot, and mouth disease is contagious, the symptoms usually resolve on their own within 1 to 2 weeks and are generally mild to moderate in intensity. I wish to take this opportunity to advise the public, on behalf of the Minister of Health, obviously, in particular children, to practice the following simple personal hygiene measures that can reduce the risk of infection. 1, wash hands frequently and thoroughly. 2, ensure the cleanliness of homes, childcare centers, kindergartens, and/or schools. 3, avoid close contacts with persons affected by the disease. 4, cover mouth and nose when sneezing and coughing. And 5, increase fluid intake to prevent dehydration.
Senator Amin.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't know if the Leader of Government Business is in a position to answer for the information of members of the public. Any kindergarten, school, or other institution who wishes to be part of the public education exercise, how do they go about engaging the minister or the unit that you have named?
Minister.
Well, from what I have here, the public education campaign comes through the Public Education Subcommittee on Vector-Borne and Communicable Diseases. So I think it's obvious that if you get in contact with that agency, you will be included on the list.
And
Senator.
Madam President, is the minister willing to provide a list of those, he indicated where you have had those exercises conducted, those schools and so on, just for our information. It could be submitted in writing at a later date that you could name.
I'm almost certain that that data is available in the Ministry of Health, and I will pass on that information to them and make them comply.
Senator Ramkissoon.
Thank you, Madam President. Question number 90 to the Minister of National Security.
Minister of National Security.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, during the period January 1st, 2018, there have been 19 reports of larceny of motor vehicles and 5 reports of robberies in which motor vehicles were taken from the owners in the southern divisions. Of these 24 reports, 3 of the victims were females. It is therefore recorded that most of the victims were not females as such. The Trinidad Police Service, Madam President, is cognizant of the reports of larceny of motor vehicles in the Southern Police Division. The following measures have been implemented by the Trinidad Police Service to address this matter. A public awareness and sensitization. All drivers are informed of safety tips via contemporary and traditional media, such as the Trinidad Police Service website, www.ttps.gov.tt, Facebook and Twitter pages, as well as the YouTube channel. Trinidad Police Service television program, Beyond the Tape, is also a key forum through which sensitization takes place. With respect to partnership with communities, officers from Trinidad Police Service are critical to this effort, and active participation in groups such as station councils, neighborhood watch groups, and village councils is encouraged. Information on maintaining safety is shared in these groups via direct engagement and supported by social media. Additionally, Madam President, active stop and search exercises are conducted. As part of the cooperation activities of the Trinidad Police Service, stop and search exercises are actively conducted across the 9 police geographic division, which includes the Southern Division, Madam President.
Senator Ramkissoon.
Thank you, Madam President. Can the Minister please indicate, from the 24 cases that you have shared in the Southern Division for car hijackings, how many of these cases have been closed or solved?
Minister.
Madam President, I can't say how many cases have been closed or solved. What I can say is that out of the 24 cases, 1 of the vehicles recovered in January and 5 in February. And this investigation are continuing.
Senator Ramkissoon. Thank you, Madam President. Are there any closure to the cases indicated by the CID in the Southern Division in relation to closing a gap with car hijackings, or, as they said in the report, a major carjacking ring in South where bandits target women drivers of the SUVs?
Senator Ramkissoon, I think you need to refine that supplementary question a little bit.
I will attempt again.
Yes.
So on the 25th of the second month, 2018, the CID from the Southern Division indicated that there were several suspects that attempted to crack a major. There were several suspects, and they attempted to crack the major hijacking ring in South. So I'm asking the Minister if he can share with us in the Senate what advancements have been done since the February 2018 this year in relation to major ring of carjackings.
Senate, I won't allow that question.
All right. I have one more.
Supplementary.
I have one more? Okay.
Yes.
From your response, Minister, can you just share with us when in South can we expect to have any kind of involvement from station councils or neighborhood watch in relation to these car hijackings?
Minister.
Madam President, the Station Council is an ongoing process. The police in all the divisions conduct Station Council meetings with the various members of the community. And so that is an ongoing process that continues throughout the division. I'm sure it will also continue in the Southern Division as well.
Public business, private members' business, motions.
Honourable Senators, the debate on the following motion, which was in progress when the Senate adjourned on Tuesday, March 6, 2018, will be resumed. Whereas financial and administrative autonomy of Parliament is an undisputed benchmark of a true democracy, and whereas a legislative proposal entitled the Houses of Parliament Service Authority Bill 2014 was laid in Parliament and referred to a Joint Select Committee in 2014, and whereas the Joint Select Committee agreed that parliamentary autonomy is essential to the recalibration of the existing relationship between the executive and the legislature, and whereas the government, in adopting the 2015 Manifesto of the People's National Movement as its official policy framework, confirmed its commitment to the principles of parliamentary autonomy, be it resolved that the Senate call on the government to introduce legislation by April 30th, 2018, to give effect to parliamentary autonomy, and that this legislation be immediately referred to a joint select committee of Parliament for early consideration and report. Honourable Senators, those who have spoken on this motion are Senator Wade Mark, who moved the motion, Senator the Honourable Jennifer Batiste Primus, Minister of Labour and Small Enterprise Development, Senator David Small, Senator Khadija Amin, Senator Daniel Duki, Senator Anita Haynes. Senator Haynes, you have 25 minutes of speaking time remaining.
Thank you, Madam President. I would just like to continue this debate on a reflective note. I'm quoting here from an article in Trinidad Guardian on Wednesday, 11th January 2012. And the quote is from a former Speaker of the House of Commons, Speaker John Bercow, who stated that there has been a decline in the deference towards constitutional bodies. And he noted that this decline, perhaps, was because we as parliamentarians and our parliaments were not living up to expectations. We had to look at ourselves and ask the questions, are we truly representative? Are we truly transparent? Are we truly accessible? Are we truly accountable? And most importantly, are we truly effective? And I started there because this motion, moved by Senator Mark, that we have been discussing, has asked for parliamentary autonomy, noting that this autonomy will mean a more effective and representative parliament. The quote is relevant because it says that we've already done the reflections. And therefore, the call to action listed by Senator Mark at the end of his motion is the point in the timeline that we have arrived at. However, as I prepared for the continuation of the debate today, I spoke with some people as to what was going on in Parliament and what we would be discussing for private members' business. And there was a sense that this motion and our reflections on things like autonomy seems misplaced at this time. And there was a sentiment that because we have moved, I think over the last couple of years, back to considering our most basic needs. Are we safe? Do we have access to quality health care? Can we afford to educate our children? We are back at a space of protesting for roads and drains and fear of rains and floods. And so this idea of debating lofty ideals such as democracy and autonomy seemed to the people that I spoke with out of place. However, because I knew I was continuing my presentation today, I want to take the opportunity to say that we should not lose hope. We should not, because things are in a state of what appears to be to most people in a state of collapse, that we should move away from looking at strengthening our institutions and strengthening our rights and moving power into the hands of the people. And we're doing that by moving more power, increasing the power of the parliament. And I use that quote because it was a symbolic time, it was at a symbolic time for our nation. It was in our 50th year of independence. And as we've moved 6 years on, we are a young nation. And we have done a lot by way of sustaining our democracy. We've had, for the most part, free and fair elections. And countries that have gained independence at the time that we gained independence have not been as fortunate. So we need to congratulate ourselves on where we are now. We've also seen greater improvements. We looked at the revamping of the standing orders that allowed for greater accountability via the introduction of prime minister's question times, the strengthening of the joint select committees, and all of these things have gotten us to a point. Where we are today is saying, have we done enough? And as I came in here today, I was very heartened to see today's editorial in the Newsday. And if I have your permission to quote from it, it's entitled, "Give Parliament More Power." And it speaks about this motion. And it shows that people are paying attention to what we do here and paying attention to what we say. And so that we have, I think, gone past the point of debating whether or not parliamentary autonomy is a goal that we wish to establish. We have established that this is where we want to go. The question now is, what steps are we going to take? And the editorial goes on. The editorial notes that while no organization is completely perfect, the parliament has been effectively run over the years. And I think that's something that we can all agree with, that it has been effective. The question is, would autonomy improve the effectiveness? And my answer would be yes. Because once you have an independent institution with with controls over its finances and recruitment, then we are saying to ourselves that what we do here as a parliament is important, equal to what the executive does, and it is an important check. And this, in our systems of checks and balances, we should want to strengthen this institution. The article notes that aside from ordinary business, it has successfully introduced special projects such as the Parliamentary channel, which has grown to become an institution in our local broadcasting landscape. And there were reflections on why this channel is important. And again, in congratulating ourselves on where we have arrived at, we should know that because of the Parliament channel and because of the increased public scrutiny, the public eye, we are more concerned with what we do here and how we behave. And on the last occasion, Madam President, it was the Vice President of the Senate and the chair at the time, but I had the occasion to raise my particular discontent with the way question time is handled and the manner in which the questions were answered. And after I did that, a lot of people came up to me and were discussing, well, you know, that they do tune in because they wanted to hear what the executive has to say. They would like to hear the answers to the questions that we pose. And I can't say that I've noted any improvement since the last occasion, but we live in hope. They also the article noted that the strengthening of our joint select committees that we've seen over time has led to greater accountability. And that it noted that this motion, if we were to move forward, and as a parliament, say this is where the direction we would like to take our country in, it would give a truly independent parliament will give greater power to these joint select committees, thereby increasing accountability and increasing scrutiny on the executive. It notes that Parliament's inability to openly police these matters, however, is not a factor which mitigates against autonomy. So that what we're looking at is taking the institution that we found and strengthening it and making it work for our country. We have, I think, an important question to ask ourselves. You see, constitutions and the constitutional setup are meant to be to afford the country stability, but also be flexible enough to grow with your nation and grow as your nation grows. And so that if you have And there's a sense that people are disconnected from what happens here. That while we sit in Parliament and we have the legislative agenda as presented by the executive, and we go through the bills and we go through the day-to-day motions of the job that we have to do here, do people feel like we are representing their interest? And the answer may not be what we would like to hear, simply because there's a sense that we are unable to keep a pace with society and to get things done. And so we have a responsibility to, as a parliament, listen to the concerns of the population and move in the direction that they would like to see us in. On the last occasion, Senator Dookie raised a couple of concerns about whether or not we were doing the best we can with what we have, and that we should therefore look at our effectiveness within our current structure. However, I think it should be noted that we've moved well past that conversation, simply because we have acknowledged that we are doing very well with what we have, and we have been able to accomplish a lot. However, what we should be seeking to do is strengthen the institution to give more power to the legislature and therefore balance the powers more effectively. There's a very strong link which binds the concept and the principles of the separation of powers with the values of an autonomous parliament. And when we look at the approaches that we have taken and the steps that we've taken over the years, we can note that in 2014, there was already a draft Houses of Parliament bill as produced by a joint select committee. And this says to me, again, that all the work has been done and that we should now be taking the step that Senator Mark's motion suggests, and that the legislation should be brought to the Senate and taken to a joint select committee, because that's the part of the process that we're at. When reflecting on these things and our job as parliamentarians, we do have a primary legislative function. And within our lawmaking process, we do have to find a way to make the system more effective. And I think Senator Small on the last occasion spoke about the bulk of the work that we do as parliamentarians and how much work is done in preparation for each bill and each motion and our role in our joint select committees. And this idea of an autonomous parliament with a budget that can help facilitate and make this process work better for the citizens of this country, I think is a critical discussion at this point in time, because when you look at the complicated pieces of legislation that come to our parliament, and as I've said before, I was educated in the United States system, and within their Congress, the members of the Congress and the members of the Senate, and I'm aware of the differences between the system, but the staffing that enables each member of the legislature to function optimally, that they are researchers and communication staff, and there's a system built around ensuring that those elected representatives, in their case, have the tools needed to be effective. We can have that here if we agree that the parliament is on par with the executive, because the executive is well-staffed and well-stocked. The parliament, on the other hand, while the MPs have certain provisions, the senators don't, and we have the same input in the lawmaking process. So these things need to be considered as we are thinking about and talking about moving our country forward. We also have an important oversight function and the function of scrutiny. And when you think about how important the oversight function is and what it means for confidence within the system, I think we would all agree that this is a step that we would need to take, because when you have questions abounding in the decisions of the executive, and I'm talking here about the things that we've seen pass through the Joint Select Committee, like the ferry scandal, that has been, ventilated within the public. It added a dimension of people saying, well, the Parliament seems to be working for us. And this movement towards an independent and autonomous Parliament can strengthen that feeling of representation and oversight and scrutiny. To give the Parliament financial and recruitment independence, we would be saying, as a Parliament, that we stand with the promotion of zero tolerance for corruption, which I think is vital to good governance and where we would want to go. A transparent and accountable government with freedom of expression that encourages full participation of the citizens in the democratic process is just something that we cannot deny is a goal that we should be putting forward. We signed on to the Latimer Principles in 2003, and we have said by signing on to that we agree to the establishment of scrutiny bodies, and that enhances public confidence and the integrity of our public bodies. So what I'm saying is that we have already done all of this work, and that we should not stop here. We should now, I think, we are ready to accept Senator Mark's proposal for the legislation to be laid in the Senate and move to the Joint Select Committee. The executive government being responsible to the Parliament for the exercise and execution of its executive power means that we have a system where the executive is accountable to the people, because that's what the Parliament is supposed to represent. And thus the strengthening of the Parliament should be part of what we consider our popular will. And so as I reflected on what we needed to do here today, I think we have gotten to the point where we have agreed that parliamentary autonomy is a good thing. We have agreed that it means more effective representation, and that it means that we would have strengthened our system of checks and balances, that we would have said here today that power belongs in the hands of the people, and that we have an opportunity here today, regardless of our political leanings, to say yes to what is essentially a good thing for our country. We have an even greater opportunity to move from saying yes to actioning what we have agreed to, so that we'll say it's not that we're willing to not only talk the talk, but we're willing to walk the walk. So the commitment to this April 30th deadline says that we are not only willing to have conversations about it, and the conversations, as I noted on the last day, have been ongoing for several years. We need to now stand, I believe, on the right side of history, and that let us be the ones who took what we received here as a Parliament and made it better, and made it stronger, and made it something that the people of Trinidad and Tobago can be ultimately proud of. And as we are as we're having this discussion here today, I think the government has also acknowledged that they're looking towards moving to autonomy for Tobago. And so this is not, I think, we're not in strange waters here. That this idea that you can recognize that the balancing of powers is important means that you should be able to recognize that the balancing of powers with respect to the parliamentary autonomy is essential to our democracy and critical to where we want to go as a country, bearing in mind that what we do here is not for today, but is for future generations. And what we intend to build should stand the test of time and stand for future generations to look on and make sure that we have indeed done them proud. With that, I thank you.
Senator Mahabir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, I had to clear with Senator Mark whether I had already spoken on this motion prior, but I was assured that this is a revised and amended motion, and so I have another opportunity to contribute. This is, Madam President, a very important and timely conversation we're having with respect to strengthening our democracy. And I had cause to refer to the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Chapter 4, Section 39. It says, "There shall be a Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, which shall consist of the President, the Senate, and the House of Representatives." So apart from our chamber, there are two other arms of the Parliament. And of course, in the state sector, we have the executive and the judiciary. And Madam President, in reflecting upon the motion of Senator Mark, I myself had occasion to recall my first entry into the Parliament, November the 20th, 1996, and the first bill I debated was the Tobago House of Assembly bill, which at that time, via legislation, ensured that the THA was to be given some 4% of the budget of Trinidad and Tobago. So we were looking at financial autonomy with respect to administrative processes, but also financial autonomy. And since then, Madam President, I have looked at the developments in the Parliament, and we have seen positive developments of the institution of the Parliament. As Senator Haynes indicated, the Parliament channel has, because of the increase in our technical capability and in the media presence, we have been able to use the Parliament channel to perform essential work of the Parliament. And there are really two essential functions. One is the legislative function, and the other is the oversight. And we have seen the Parliament channel really taking the work of the Parliament to the people and inviting the people via the interactions to become more participatory in their democracy. And that situation, that process is going to get better. We have seen since the 10th Parliament, Madam President, the growth of a number of new committees which did not exist in the 9th. In particular, the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Energy Committee, which has been making so much of valuable investigations into that critical sector in Trinidad and Tobago, the Committee on National Security, and the committee which I chair, which is Social Services. We have seen a number of different committees arising based upon the evolution of the country and based upon the work of the Parliament, the expertise which we are developing in the Parliament. So we have been doing, over the last 20 years, a lot of positive work to ensure that the Parliament, which really has three separate components, is able to discharge its functions to the people. And what are the functions? We need to provide the best representation. No one in this chamber is elected. That does not mean that we are not able to think about the problems of Trinidad and Tobago, put ourselves in the position of the people, whether they are aligned to political parties or not, look at all people living in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are able to articulate on their behalf measures, legislative measures, which hopefully will improve their lives now and in the future. And we are also able, in a reasonably effective way, to provide oversight
on those who wield executive power, who are here with us as ministers, who are in the other place also as ministers. We look at the executive branch of government, and we are able to investigate the actions of the executive. And when we see actions of the executive which are contrary to the public interest, we are able to alert the population through the Parliament channel, through the Joint Select Committee system, that we have spotted problems and that we are making recommendations to those who man the executive to amend their ways so that the public welfare may be improved. And the way we are now structured is that once recommendations are made, there is a process within a 2-month period in which there must be a response. We are able to look at those responses, and if we are satisfied with them, we accept them, and we can have follow-up inquiries so that the work of the Parliament is ongoing. And I think we need to do a bit more with respect to educating the population as a whole on exactly what the day of a parliamentarian may be like. And I imagine, I was not here when Senator Small made his contribution, but I imagine Senator Small would have indicated that what the public sees, what they are seeing now, is only maybe a few percentage points of what the parliamentarian has to do when he is not on camera. We do need to continue this work that we have been doing over the last 2 decades. We need to ensure that the representation that we give the population is effective. And we need to ask ourselves now, what do we mean by autonomy? And how will autonomy allow us to discharge our functions better? Well, by autonomy, I mean largely financial autonomy, because we do conduct our processes in a relatively autonomous manner now. In the Joint Select Committee system, we regulate our own affairs. No 2 committees are the same. We decide as members of that committee how to conduct our affairs, what is the best course of action, and we are autonomous in that way. With respect to how we conduct our business in this chamber, we are ruled by the standing orders, and the chamber has a standing orders committee, which is an autonomous committee which will look at the standing orders to see how these standing orders can be amended. And between 1996 and now, I have seen many changes to the standing orders. For example, in this particular 2016 standing orders, the most recent, there is the definition of the coordinator of the independent bench, which existed not before in any other standing orders, because we are seeing now that we need to make changes as we go along so that we can perform our administrative functions a little bit better. What, however, will financial autonomy do? The judiciary obtains its block transfer. It, of course, must give an account, as all agencies, the THA must give an account. It must have its internal audit processes in place. It must prepare its annual reports. It must present them so that the Auditor General can review them. The reports must be approved by the Parliament. So every agency, judiciary, THA, the various ministries, the parastatal agencies, all of us must account, including the Parliament. We too must account for the monies we spend, and if there are any questions, we also must stand ready to answer those questions in a public forum. So we are not immune from any of the questioning, and I have actually seen the Parliament appear before a Joint Select Committee of which I was a member, so that there is accountability going on. And I think we need to ask ourselves, how will financial autonomy now contribute to strengthening the institution of the Parliament so that the people's business can be transacted more efficiently and the people's welfare may be enhanced with autonomy? Madam President, what will financial autonomy do? According to the Constitution, there shall be a Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago which shall consist of the President, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. I imagine if we had financial autonomy, President's House, which has been in disrepair since 2000, which would now be, I think 2010. It has been in disrepair for quite a while. I don't know if former President Max Richards ever occupied President's house. It was under repair. I think with parliamentary autonomy, we would have been able to look at the office of the President as an arm of the Parliament as decreed by the Constitution, and we would have ensured that that situation of the deterioration of that monument, that historic building left for us by the colonial administration, would not be in the state that it is in. And we could also think with financial autonomy of having a museum when you travel to countries. And Trinidad and Tobago should not have to be copying people. I will come to that. We should be setting the bar. We should have a parliamentary museum as well, chronicling what has happened in Trinidad and Tobago pre-independence, post-independence. We should have a museum tracing our parliament from the first time since in 1925 when there were elections for the first time. We should have that institution available for all, for Trinidadians, Tobagonians, CARICOM citizens, and the rest of the world. This is our democracy. This is the history of it. So I think with autonomy, financial autonomy, that's something we can do. If we leave that to the executive, with all the pressures placed on the executive, some of these issues may fall through the cracks. Madam President, how could we, with financial autonomy, really ensure that representation is enhanced? As I mentioned prior, since 2015, we have had new committees, one of which was the Foreign Affairs Committee. I was the first chairman of that Foreign Affairs Committee. And as chairman of that Foreign Affairs Committee, I did not have a clue as to how a Foreign Affairs Committee ought to conduct its business. And I needed some technical assistance. I would have liked to be able to appeal to you, Madam President, the holder of a particular budget, to indicate that I have looked at parliaments close by, I have looked at Jamaica, I have looked at Canada. I would like if you would agree for a 5-day visit so that I could actually find out from the people who conduct such a committee how they go about doing their business. But we do not have that facility. You do not have a budget. My presiding officer does not have a budget, and the work that I should have been able to do, I had to find out on my own. Well, you may argue, since you found it out on your own, you shouldn't really need extra financing, but it becomes easier. You see, Madam President, that's the same argument that is leveled against academics. Since you can read the journals, why go to a conference? You go to conferences to engage in socializing. Well, the socializing is part of it. It's really boring staying in your office all semester, and you look forward to a little conference in your field at the end of the semester. There are certain benefits when you interact face-to-face with your colleagues who are researching the same topics. And I think in that way you strengthen institutions, you strengthen collaborations. And in that way, Madam President, as I said, Trinidad and Tobago, with the experience we have, should be providing much more technical assistance to our CARICOM neighbors on the functioning of the parliament. It would be good if we could harmonize our standing orders. We are looking towards harmonizing a great deal of our trade and monetary arrangements. Could we look at our standing orders and see to what extent we can harmonize as well certain procedures and protocols in how we conduct our parliament? But recently, in one of the visits I made to represent Trinidad and Tobago conference in St. Kitts, the Caribbean participants indicated that it would be good if we, with the experience we have developed, can visit them and provide some kind of training to MPs and their staff there on some of the findings on how we perform our oversight functions. We have, in a very short space of time, I'm happy to say, our colleagues in this chamber and in the other place have developed a level of expertise and oversight that I think can be of benefit to the strengthening of CARICOM. But that would require, Madam President, a budget from my presiding officer from which she can draw when I justify. I said, this particular CARICOM country, during the break, I would like to visit to indicate to them what I know, together with a particular officer from the Parliament and some of the colleagues in my committee. We can make a 3-day trip to peoples elsewhere, but it, of course, would require the approval because it requires financing. And I think, if we do that, and we are able to strengthen the parliaments in the Caribbean in that way, you will find that many of the problems we experience in CARICOM can become less severe. We already would have integrated at the parliamentary level in the sharing of our expertise. That will require, of course, the provision of financing. And if we were to go to the executive every time to make a justification for that, the process will become cumbersome, and many of these initiatives may not materialize. So I think we do need the ability to disburse our own funds, and we do have a protocol to follow. We don't draw down on funds simply because it's allocated. We justify, and when we return from our missions abroad, we simply outline what we did. In fact, in my other incarnation at the Caribbean Development Bank, before I came back to base on a Monday morning from visiting one of my countries, I had to present a back-to-office report, so that there are accounting mechanisms that we can implement. These were the people I met. These were the sessions I held. This is the outcome of the visit. And we provide a record of interparliamentary associations and assistance. Madam President, there is a need, certainly amongst the independent senators. Speak for yourself, I was once told. Don't speak for the whole bench. Today I'm speaking for the bench. Yeah, I'm speaking for because you see, as an independent senator, you do not, I don't know who said that, maybe I don't write. Speak for yourself. I'm speaking for the whole bench. Yeah. We don't have any research assistants, unlike members of the government who may have the political party and the ministry staff to assist them with their parliamentary work. Members of the opposition would have their political party. There is no such thing as an independent political party of Trinidad and Tobago, as much as some people may say otherwise. There is no political party. But because, according to the standing orders, independent senators, the new standing orders, independent senators are required to chair the 66A committees of the Constitution. That responsibility places upon the independent senator a certain amount of pressure on his expertise. And it would be nice if he can get some research assistance. It would be good if, to assist us in discharging our functions, because we are now mandated we have no choice, we are mandated by the standing orders to chair these committees as enshrined in 66A of the Constitution. We could get the assistance so that we could, we don't have to have an office, I understand the space, but via electronic communication, I should be able to communicate with my research assistant and tell him or her that could you do the background work on these subjects for me. That is to assist with respect to my work as a committee chairman. I get valuable support from the parliamentary staff. I do. But you see, the parliamentary staff is not dedicated to my committee alone. They are divided amongst a few committees, and I am sure they are overstretched. When I ask for information, they do give, but I have to research on my own. It would be good to get a research assistant for that, who will be paid from a budget approved by Madam President. Madam President, there are certain matters that I find particularly interesting, but I have not had the time to research them. The parliamentary agenda is packed. one, and I'd like to bring private members' motion. I'm thinking about them, but without proper research assistance, I can't frame my motion in a manner that I would feel comfortable with. Take, for example, the issue of decriminalizing marijuana. In a recent trip abroad, I went to a store and I said, I hope no one is looking at Senator Mahabir in Canada, because in that store, what I saw, it's a marijuana dispensary, marijuana fudge, marijuana sweetie, marijuana cake. And I went in and they said, no, you can't buy, you could look, because you need a prescription. The Canadians are eating the lunch of Trinidad and Tobago when it comes to marijuana medicines, which are now known for things like cancer, epilepsy, and so on. And I would like to frame a motion so that we could debate in the Parliament. I could do it, but I need detailed assistance. It's a sensitive topic. Gay rights, a sensitive topic. I'd like to research that. Abortion rights, I would like to research it because I am pro-choice and I am very much against discriminating against people of the gay community. And I really would like marijuana, medicinal marijuana, to be in Trinidad and Tobago prescribed. That's what I'd like. But I need the research assistance. How will I get the research assistance? Given the salary that I get from the Parliament, $13,000, not 30, I'll come back to that. 13, and I think, to be quite honest, it's 13 and 60 or something like that. I think that if there was a budget in the Parliament where an OJT can be recruited and retained and approved by Madam President for 3 months, I would simply tell my OJT, could you in 1 month research medicinal marijuana for me? Could you in the other month do gay rights? And it has to be detailed because I want to see what other jurisdictions are doing in the world, how I can tweak my motion so that I can present a watertight argument in the Parliament. That facility is not available to me. And that, I think, is undermining my own ability to become a much more effective legislator than I am currently. I would really like if we can have the autonomy to do that without going to the executive to get approval to say we need to hire an OJT for senators on the independent bench. Great would be the day, Madam President, where every independent senator has a research assistant, an OJT, someone who's doing an MA in political science, who can be on call for the independent members so that they can do some background research. Similar, Senator Haynes is familiar with the US system. Every US senator has a team of researchers who are looking at a team of researchers who are looking at matters of interest to that senator and who are alerting him to what he can do. So you get things like the Dodd-Frank Amendment. These things were always made by the researchers on hand. We don't have that. And autonomy will allow us to do that. And I think that my colleagues here, they, of course, when they come to speak, they will, of course, regale their own experiences in having to perform all the work themselves. And we are supposed to be part-time. Right. Madam President, I support the motion of Senator Mark. And in the 10th Parliament, when Senator Mark was then the Speaker in the other place, I saw a number of positive changes in the standing orders, and I am hoping that in the 11th Parliament we will continue, because more and more, as much as the talk show participants like to decry the Parliament, I am sensing that because of what they are seeing on a daily basis, they now make their criticisms tongue-in-cheek. Criticisms are very good, but I am getting a sense that there is more and more respect for the work of the parliamentarian as time progresses, and I'm hoping that this will continue. But, Madam President, let us work on autonomy. Let us work on the formula that we need to provide an amount of resources from the executive to the legislative arm of the state. And that includes the office of the president as well. So we would want autonomy for all the arms of the parliament, financial autonomy. We have other jurisdictions to look at. We can follow what they are doing, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We really should now engage in a public education campaign with the population on why financial autonomy will ultimately be of benefit to them. However, Madam President, there are some low-hanging fruit that I think we ought to pick so that the parliament as a whole can make life a little bit more comfortable for its members, and a comfortable member will be a more productive member. This vexing issue of facilities for the differently disabled. I know Senator Roach has spoken on this matter, but as we speak, Senator Roach, my colleague, my dear friend and esteemed colleague, cannot approach you. And I know we are in a temporary situation with respect to parliamentary facilities, chamber facilities, and we should get back to our home in short order. But that has been for quite a while. Things in our country take a little time, and we should be looking at facilities for the differently abled. I do not know if I moved around on a wheelchair like my colleague, how I could park in the Parliament's car park across on Dock Road and get from there to here. I do not know how my colleague does it, but I am sure he does it with a great deal of difficulty. There is, Madam President, something we can do for parliamentarians with young children. In particular, they will be women. But do we have any facilities in the parliament for a member of parliament, invariably a woman, who has a child who is a year old or less? When we have long sittings, how is she going to make arrangements to look after the baby? Could we not consider, and you don't have to be a woman in my mind to look at women's issues, you know. You just have to be a person to look at the problem of another person. Shouldn't we have more young women who have young children participating in the parliament? After all, when I see so many issues affecting women out there, I think I would like to see women, even though they have commitments of job and commitments of children, to be able to come and participate in the debates and to stay in the chamber even when we go up to 10 o'clock. Well, we haven't gone beyond 10 in the 11th Parliament. The 10th Parliament was a different matter. Senator Small and I remember, started one morning at 10, and we completed the debate 4 or 5 a.m. the next morning. 5 a.m., yes, thank you, Senator Small. And I don't know how people were functioning. I don't know how we function. But parliamentary hours can be long. And I think we should give consideration somewhere in the first floor of the parliament to a little daycare, indicate to a young parliamentarian with a young child, not to worry, you will have the facilities in the parliament, and we will look after your child while you are in the chamber. That does not exist now. And I say this, Madam President, because every time I travel, I look. I travel on private business, personal expenses, because the parliament has no money to facilitate any kind of travel. I visited the Ottawa City Hall on one of my trips, and there were 2 signs in the Ottawa City Hall. Anyone who visited, it's just off Elgin Street. No smoking in this building. And the second sign is, you can breastfeed here any day, any time. And so they made their city hall user-friendly for women with young children. And I exited on the other door, same 2 signs. No smoking and breastfeeding. In our parliament, in our nursery, we should have that facility as well. That's a low-hanging fruit. That will allow for greater participation, because I sense that mothers with young children may be dissuaded from participating. And for me, the objective of a parliament is to have as wide a representation as possible. Madam President, another low-hanging fruit, to make us a little more effective in how we conduct our affairs. Recently in the news, I heard Calypso Rose being given a diplomatic passport. And I said, that made news? Calypso Rose, I sang Calypso Rose's Fire, Fire in Your Wire, Wire when I was about 6 or 7. Everybody knows Calypso Rose. And when I heard that Calypso Rose was given a diplomatic passport, I went back to my archives, and I found this document. It's red. Senator Roach can look at it. It's a diplomatic passport given to Dhanayshar Mahabir in January the 24th, 1918. I was 29 years old, and I was given a diplomatic passport by the Caribbean Development Bank. I left it, and so because I was told I was very bright, I realized I was not very smart to leave the diplomatic passport. And now, 30 years later, when you're going through Piarco with that official passport that you have, I have to take out my shoes and my belt and everything. And, Madam President, I raise this because of the following. Representing Trinidad and Tobago, once Senator Mark was with me in London. He traveled diplomatic. I am an official. Senator MP Dial Singh was with me. Both of us were official passport. We got separated unofficial. I am addressing the General Assembly of the IPU, representing Trinidad. But I had to travel like a regular individual with that official passport they gave me. It won't cost anything to give every parliamentarian, 71 of us, this document and take it back when Parliament is dissolved. That will certainly show a little more respect for the Parliament.
Senator Mahabir, just for clarification, a diplomatic passport does not exclude you from security checks. Okay? And that's a fact.
Right. Thank you very much. It does not preclude, but it certainly makes transit a little easier. It makes it easier. You see, the example I am quoting is, I'm representing Trinidad and Tobago. I'm not going on a vacation to Geneva. Senator Mark, as speaker, former speaker, is traveling diplomatic. I am traveling on the official. I am taken aside. You're representing Trinidad official delegation. Doesn't matter. I think let us harmonize. It won't cost anything to show a little courtesy to all 71 members, because it shouldn't only be the executive. The executive, they get that to flash the red. At 29 years old, I was flashing this red. 30 years later, I have the regular one. So, Madam President, that's a low-hanging fruit we can do to show the courtesies. And from the intervention of my good friend and colleague, Senator Franklin Khan, I have a suspicion this recommendation ain't going nowhere. It's not going anywhere. A diplomatic passport for all MPs.
That is misconstrued.
Thank you very much. I said I got the impression. Madam President, I traveled twice to represent the Parliament, and I was concerned. I said, suppose I fall ill while I am on official business. Is there a medical plan that will look after my ambulance needs and so on? I was told, no, it does not happen. Try and don't fall and break your leg when you are outside. And so I think a low-hanging fruit. We represent the country. Let us have a medical plan, at least, for MPs when they travel. And well, suppose I were to get ill in Trinidad and Tobago. What are the facilities available while I discharge my functions as an MP? The functions of an MP are onerous. They are demanding. It takes away our time from exercising. Many parliamentarians have fallen ill on the job. We have a gym upstairs, but I don't have the time to even go and participate in that gym. I would like to think that every MP, once you carry the title of Member of Parliament in the other place and here, that you are going to be covered by some kind of medical arrangement. So while you are discharging your functions as an MP on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, with the $13,000 that you get as an MP, we're not going to ask you to pay any additional medical bills. The Parliament will cover it for you. And I know there is a case where there is a current minister of government who is receiving medical assistance, and I'm very happy that the current minister is receiving the medical assistance. I really would like to know, if a senator were to fall ill whether the same facilities will be extended. And if it is not, then an autonomous Parliament, I, as an ill member, should be able to petition my president and say, President, I have fallen ill on the job. I need the surgery. Will the Parliament cover it via the Parliament's blanket insurance? Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, low-hanging fruit, things we can do while we wait for autonomy. There is that issue of the salary. It is not within our control. I think the general population is aware that the salary that we receive does not compensate in any way the efforts that we put in, and the salary really needs to be changed. That is left up to the goodwill and the good graces of the Salaries Review Commission. And I think we will wait until it becomes very chilly in that place where it is said that the undesirable character lives. But while we wait for hell to get a little snowflake and then for the SRC to pay legislators fairly, I think really we need to revisit the issue that I raised. I raised it in the last session. I could revisit it safely now. You see that retiring the Legislative Services Allowances Act, which includes some senators and exclude others? I would invite government and opposition together. Government voted against me. Opposition abstained. I am grateful to my colleagues on the independent bench for seeing the merit of what I have to say. Because, Madam President, all we need to do is go back to my closing arguments when I argued, is that we need to ensure that there is an end to discrimination in the Senate. It has absolutely no financial implications for the state because the retiring allowances is a contributory plan that you access when you reach age 55, I think. Some of my younger colleagues who are age 30 would contribute to the plan. And when they leave Parliament, for 25 years, they will obtain nothing, but at age 55, they will get a quarter of their last salary, which is some $3,000. I think it will go a long way to saying thank you for the services that you have rendered. Because more and more, what we are seeing is that the parliamentary agenda is packed. We are not part-time in reality. We are part-time in name only. Every single day we are here. And I think in order to really represent the people, we need to attract the best in our society. And by the best, I mean those who are most committed. We need to tell them we will never be able to pay you, but we should be able to say thank you. And I think we need government and opposition. Just revisit my closing argument when I filed my private member's motion on the Retiring Allowances Act for legislators. And the argument there was a simple one. In order to attract people who will serve, let us tell them, you will be able to contribute to a plan. And when you reach age 55, you will get a little quarter of your salary. I think that will go a long way to showing some gratitude. Madam President, if we in this chamber, government and opposition, cannot show gratitude to people in this chamber, what are we going to leave for the people of Trinidad and Tobago who already hold us in such low esteem? Revisit the Legislative Allowances Act, low-hanging fruit, and I think once we are able, Madam President, to get some of those niggling problems out of the way, autonomy will take care of its own, and we will see over the next few years better and better representation, and we would see the finest people in Trinidad and Tobago lining up, queuing up to perform the public service in the Senate and in the other place. Madam President, I thank you, and I support the motion.
Senator De Freitas.
Thank you, Madam President, for the opportunity to join this debate moved by the leader of opposition business in this Senate that seeks to address the issue of parliamentary autonomy. Madam President, I have noted that the other two occasions that this particular motion came up, I happened to be fulfilling my duties as Vice President of this Senate in another place. And therefore, on the last occasion of Private Members' Day was the actual first time that I would have heard comments being put forward in this debate. And one of the things that I noted was that Senator Mark would have suggested, in that this being the third attempt at moving this motion, that there was some stalling tactic at play by those that sit on this side. And I just want to put on the record right away that that can be furthest from the truth, and I will deal with that at a later stage in my contribution. But what I've also noticed by the 7 members that have spoken before me is that each and every one, for the most part, has gone in to explain what parliamentary autonomy is and the principle of the separation of powers. But no one thus far has explained exactly why the separation of powers came into being. And Madam President, last year, I had the privilege of being selected to engage in a course that dealt with parliamentary models at various jurisdictions in the world. And that course would have culminated in a 1-week session in South Africa, where you would have ended up with a diploma at the end. And one of the topics that we would have discussed would have been separation of powers and parliamentary autonomy, and exactly why that would have come into being. And Madam President, one of the reasons that would have happened is that in former governance structures, specifically monarchies where you had kings and queens, or institutions where you had the powers put into one individual in that institution, you ended up with a situation whereby you would have these powers being abused to the point where you would have tyranny, unchecked corruption, and wanton oppression of the very people that you were trying to serve. And so, Madam President, I think each and everybody in this chamber knows this saying that power corrupts and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And it is based on that statement that you would have seen individuals, when they had all of this power, leading to this type of tyranny, this unchecked corruption, and this oppression. And when this oppression occurred, what you had was that it would have been extended for very long periods of times, because these institutions or these individuals would not want to let go of that power. So the principle of separation of powers between the 3 separate arms, namely the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, would have come into being through the efforts of a French philosopher by the name of Montesquieu. And you would have heard Senator Mark mention that name in the moving of his motion. But the end goal of such an action was to ensure that no one entity has all the power and that each one acts as a check and a balance to the other. So, Madam President, it is in that context that the idea of parliamentary autonomy, both financial and administrative, has in principle found agreement by all in this chamber thus far. Where the opinions deviate is in exactly how and what would that financial autonomy or parliamentary autonomy look like, and the time frame in which that this should be done. And I think every member that has contributed thus far has indicated that we enjoy a pretty robust level of parliamentary autonomy now as it is. And what we have to ensure when we are thinking of adding more parliamentary autonomy is to ensure that that accountability that we have right now is not undermined in any way. We have to add to that accountability when it is that we are thinking of increasing any parliamentary autonomy. Madam President, Senator Mark in his contribution seemed to passionately be advocating for an expedient approach or a sense of urgency to bring in parliamentary autonomy, financial and administrative, to Trinidad and Tobago. However, the impact of such a change, positive as it may be, cannot be rushed and should not be taken lightly. One of the ideas put forward in how to achieve financial autonomy spoke to mimicking the model that is being used in the Tobago House of Assembly right now, and Senator Mahabir would have discussed this in his contribution, whereby a percentage of the national budget is given, and that model could be adapted to engage in financial autonomy to ensure that the Parliament has guaranteed percentage of the national budget coming to it to be able to spend. Now, when I first heard the idea, I thought to myself, well, that seemed pretty simple. But as I allowed the thought to marinate, and I thought for a second, and I looked at the model that he spoke about in terms of mimicking, I realized that there were disadvantages in that model as well as some advantages. And Madam President, one of the disadvantages that I realized, the Tobago House of Assembly every June puts forward a budget for the governance of Tobago. And in that budget, they would put forward estimated expenditure for the year forthcoming. And then in October, we hear the national budget. And what usually happens is that in that national budget, you would hear that Tobago is getting the legal amount that they're supposed to get, which is just above 4%. And then you end up in a situation where Tobago has now implemented a second budget after that budget to deal with the gap between the estimated expenditure that they would have indicated in June and the percentage of the national budget that was given. So what I'm saying is that the estimated expenditure for Tobago is always more than the percentage that is given. And therefore, if we apply that very same model without thinking about it properly, you can end up in a situation where the Parliament puts forward estimated expenditure, but the percentage that we would have come up with in whatever formula that was used is less. And then you have to go back to the executive through the Minister of Finance to ask for the remainder of money in that gap, thereby undermining the very same parliamentary autonomy, financial, that you were trying to seek in the first place. And we heard Senator Mahabir in his contribution speak to, when he first came into this parliament, how this parliament has grown naturally over the years. We've had a much larger number of GSCs coming into play. We've had a parliament channel start up, and all of these things would carry with it a cost. So there's a natural growth happening under the parliamentary autonomy that we're enjoying now that would increase the expenditure of the parliament, and therefore that's a very real disadvantage that can come into play if you do not get that formula right. And Madam President, as I move on to the second disadvantage, which is a subset of the first one, I really want to ask the question, what justification would we use to come up with that number? That's a real question, because if you get that number wrong, what you have end up happening is that you have to keep coming back to the Parliament, of which the executive is a part, to change that number until you get it right. And if the objective in the first place is to increase your financial autonomy, then you would have undermined that if you do not get that number right. When the Tobago House of Assembly went to the Dispute Resolution Commission to get their percentage or that number, they would have had a number of criteria which they would have used, things like the size of the island, the size of the population, and revenue generating potential. So what I'm asking is what criteria, given that the three arms of the state are equal in stature, as Senator Marcus put forward, but they're not really equal in operation. You have the expenditure making up a much larger portion of the expenditure for Trinidad and Tobago, and they are the major arm of the state that is responsible for revenue generation. So the question really is, what justification would be used? How would you come up with that number, and how would we guarantee that that number is right so we don't end up coming back to the executive through the Parliament to get the number correct and thereby undermining the very financial autonomy that you're seeking to achieve? So, Madam President, like I said, it's not impossible to come up with a formula. I'm not advocating that we shouldn't try or anything like that. I'm just saying that there's so many different modes and models that could be put forward when you're speaking about parliamentary autonomy, and therefore we should not rush to get this done. We should not be applying timelines. We should be taking our time to ensure that we get it right so that we don't end up undermining the parliamentary autonomy that we enjoy now. Madam President, those are some of the disadvantages that I came up with when I thought about the one model that was put forward in Senator Mark's movement of the motion. Now, it is not without merit, and it is not without its advantages. And we've heard most of the members that spoke before me speak to being more robust in terms of oversight, being more robust in terms of the number of GSCs that you can have if you were to implement such a model and you were actually able to get the formula right and have a surplus, you would be able to do these things in a greater way. But one of the things that I would like to outline in terms of advantages that nobody has spoken about, and I assume it's just because it has never come up in anybody's mind to date, is the ability of the Parliament to work towards ensuring the parliamentary process is truly reflective of our reality. And what reality is that? That we are two islands, one country. Since Trinidad and Tobago has been put together and the seat of Parliament has been put in Trinidad, the parliamentary processes have been very rare in relation to Tobago. What do I mean by that? I can say in this 11th Parliament, and Madam President, let me just take this opportunity to commend and thank the chairman of the committees on which I sit and the members for acquiescing to request to have sittings in Tobago of those joint select committees when it was asked of them to deal with inquiries into the Tobago House of Assembly as well as issues that affect Tobago. But really and truly, If this is the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, that should not be a special mention. That should be something that is part of the norm. And so, Madam President, what I'm saying is that one of the advantages, if you were to able to get the kind of financial autonomy that you're talking about, where you would get that surplus using the model that I first identified with the percentage of the national budget, is that you would be able to have more of these parliamentary processes occurring in Tobago. Madam President, but the most important parliamentary process that has been absent since Trinidad and Tobago has come together is that of sittings of the houses in Tobago. And as much as I may understand that the other place, which is the House of Representatives, there's a limitation in that, being that that house is actually a representation of constituencies, 39 of which are in Trinidad and 2 of which are in Tobago, and therefore you may not want to have a sitting of the House of Representatives in Tobago. The Senate does not have such limitation. And as much as we sit here, we are selected, we don't have constituencies to represent, and the way I see it is that there's really no limitation other than a financial one as to why you can't have a sitting of the Senate in Tobago. For example, how nice would it be on the Tobago Autonomy Bill that will come up for debate at some point in this 11th Parliament to have that Senate sitting in Tobago so that the people of Tobago can be a part of that process in the public gallery for this particular bill, if successfully passed, which will grossly affect their lives. So, Madam President, what I'm saying is that with financial autonomy and any model that allows for that, you can have an advantage whereby, and just thinking in the future, the Parliament may see it fit to set up an office of the Parliament in Tobago. And in that office of the Parliament, you would have a chamber. And in that chamber, from time to time, when bills come up in the Senate that could affect the lives of people in Tobago, you would then have that sitting in Tobago. And to me, that is probably one of the biggest advantages of financial autonomy, where you would get parliamentary autonomy, where the Parliament could prioritize such a thing to ensure that the parliamentary process is truly reflective of the fact that it is the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. But that does not mean that you cannot have that now with the level of parliamentary autonomy that we have. There's really no deterrent. You could have it. And Senator Mahabir in his contribution would have indicated that throughout the years we have seen the Parliament becoming more and more robust by adding Parliament channel, by adding Facebook pages, by adding all sorts of programs to ensure that the oversight mechanism that we enjoy now is very robust. So as much as I've given disadvantages, I'm also saying that the advantages that we have is not to say that you absolutely need parliamentary autonomy to execute them, but you can execute them without. It's just as Senator Mahabir indicated, it would be easier. So, Madam President, I think in the end, what Senator Mark is advocating for really is the removal of the ability or the potential in the future for any Minister of Finance to say no to the Parliament or squeeze the Parliament for funds. He did mention, again, as most members did, that so far, functionally, we've had a certain level of parliamentary autonomy, save for an isolated incident involving Minister Ramkissoon. But for the most part, we've enjoyed a decent level of parliamentary autonomy. I, however, am not quite convinced that this functional parliamentary autonomy that we're enjoying now, that we have, is needed to be changed with the kind of urgency that Senator Mark is purporting. I believe that the reason we've not seen a breach in the parliamentary autonomy that we've enjoyed is because the executive sits as part of the Parliament or the legislature in the system that we follow, which is the Westminster system. And it would be undermining oneself if an executive attempted, through financial constraints of any kind, to squeeze the Parliament for funds. Because the very same resources available to every single bench in this House is also available to the executive. You have, in the other House, House of Representatives, you have the MP's constituency offices that fall under the Parliament. You have the very chairs that we sit on, nice plush chairs that we sit on, the food that we eat in the tea room. All of these things are paid for by the Parliament. All of these things are used by the very executive that forms part of the legislature. And any attempt to undermine the financial autonomy of the Parliament would lead to that undermining of oneself. And so, Madam President, what I'm saying is that the robustness of the oversight that has been added to the Parliament over the years would not allow any government in the future or otherwise to undermine that financial autonomy that we enjoy now. Anytime that happens, the first thing that you will notice or you will see is the opposition of the day will get up and they will voice that through the various programs or the various avenues that they have for oversight in this parliament. Secondary to that, I believe, honestly, Senator Small in his contribution spoke to the public and their perception of the parliament, but I believe that the public, in their perception of the parliament as an institution, still takes pride in a well-functioning, well-run, and efficient parliament. And therefore, I do not think that any government would take the risk of undermining the parliamentary autonomy that we have now, lest they have to deal with the backlash that would come from the public and the opposition at the time. But it's more important to realize that due to the cyclic nature of how these things go, that government may very well end up in the opposition position and then be at the other end in relation to whatever constraints that they would have put in place. So, Madam President, yes, parliamentary autonomy is important. I agree with my colleague, Minister of Labour, Senator Baptiste Primus, that such an important change is not to be taken lightly. I do not agree, however, with Senator Mark that there is any deception on the part of those on this side at all, and let me just address that here. Senator Mark is moving a motion that in principle is agreeable to all, but in moving that motion is coming across as though he's trying to bully the government into doing what he wants. He's claiming that this is the third attempt at moving the motion, and somehow he's discerning that some resistance, he's discerning that there's some resistance, and that is why he amended his motion to add a timeline. Madam President, this is a private member's motion, and in my time here and in the other duties that I fulfill, I had gotten a better understanding of how the parliamentary processes work. And as far as I understand it, when we have private members' motion, you would hear the leader of government business raise on the motion for adjournment prior to the private members' day, and he would indicate that the next day is private members' day, and Senator Mark, having 99.9% of the private motions on the order paper, would say that Senator Mark has agreed to do X private motion. So I don't understand how Senator Mark could be purporting that in this being the third attempt, there's some sort of stalling tactic on our end, when he is the one responsible for prioritizing the private members' motions in the first place. He could have easily brought this private members' motion in the first session of Parliament and ensured it went to completion at that point. And this is why we have to be careful, Madam President, because as much as this motion is agreeable, you can't really take what the opposition is saying, and you always have to be vigilant in terms of what they're trying to do. So, Madam President, let me just draw your attention, for example, to some comments made by Senator Mark on the previous private members' day. And I quote, Senator Mark said, Mr. Vice President, what has happened is that some of our colleagues on the government bench, they get confused with their roles. They do not understand that when they come to this parliament, they wear the hat of a legislator. And therefore, in doing that, they must do everything in their power to protect the interests of the legislature. Now, again, he's blaming members on this side and saying that we don't understand our roles. And I just want members of this chamber to listen to what Senator Mark said a mere 2 minutes later. I think, Mr. Vice President, with the greatest respect, if I were ever to be given the opportunity by the leader of my party when we win the next election to serve in the capacity of Speaker, listen carefully, Speaker, I want to give you the undertaking, and I think everybody who started in the first session of this Parliament knows that when you utter the words in this chamber, undertaking, it's just as good as a guarantee. So he says, I give you the undertaking because you would not be here. But I want to give the Honourable Vice President the undertaking, and that does not mean anything in a negative way, sir. It is just to say you would not be here, and I will address that comment when I'm in the end of my contribution. But I go on. He says, but I want to tell you, Mr. Vice President, that I want to give this Parliament and the people of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago the undertaking that we will bring about parliamentary independence for the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. If the government does not want to bring about parliamentary independence, it will take a UNC government and its allies to bring about that kind of independence for the Parliament of the Republic of TNT. I want to give you that undertaking if I ever get the opportunity again. Can anybody in this chamber tell me what's wrong with that statement? Who's confusing roles in this chamber? Can anyone explain to me how a post that is impartial, a post that is at the very center of parliamentary autonomy, that we enjoy now and hope to improve, could instruct, could in any way assume or assure the passage of legislation brought by an Attorney General, a member of the executive, or a party for parliamentary autonomy? Who is confusing their roles in this chamber? Madam President, that statement alone undermines the very autonomy that we enjoy now. What did Senator Mark mean by if he becomes Speaker, he gives an undertaking, a guarantee that the UNC and their allies will bring parliamentary autonomy to this nation? Madam President, there is a saying that goes, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. And with that statement, Senator Mark has thrown away the cup, spilt the context, and stained this very motion. But you know what, Madam President? Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Let's assume by some twist of reality that that particular post had the ability to influence in any way the legislative agenda of an executive. Who was the person in that post for the last 5 years previous to this 11th Parliament? And somehow, that bill never made it to the floor of this Parliament until 2014. Secondary to that, Madam President, there was a joint select committee that was set up when that bill made it to the floor. Do you know who was the chairman of that committee? Take a wild guess. The mover of this motion. That individual had the ability to set the work agenda, to set the progress of that committee, and yet is standing up to say that it was not done, but coming today to dictate to us our timeline, our work agenda, and our work ethic. Senator Mark does not have the moral authority to dictate any timeline on this motion. Madam President, I sit on committees in this 11th Parliament, committees that meet every week, that have public meetings every single week. So therefore, he cannot dictate to us any timeline. I know it could have been done in the time that he had it to do, and it was not done, and he cannot blame anyone but himself. So, Madam President, I give you the undertaking today and the assurance that we will continue our work, and with our work ethic and our commitment, we will get to parliamentary autonomy as promised in the manifesto and in the legislative agenda, and continue to create laws for the good governance of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, I would just like to finish with a piece of advice to Senator Mark in relation to the direct response in the comment he directed at me. And I would say to Senator Mark that by virtue of time and age, I can say that you are exhaling in relation to your political career, whilst I am now beginning to inhale. And in your own words, I don't want you to take that negatively. I'm not your doctor, as you've mentioned in this chamber, but I would advise you, do not hold your breath in that prediction. You will not survive. Senator Mark, in your own words, don't take it negatively. It's just the truth. But, Madam President, on a change of note, in this chamber we throw our quips and we throw our barbs. Such is the nature of debate, such is the nature of a difference of opinion. But at the end of the day, we do it for the good governance of this country, and we do it for the love of our people. When we leave here and we go home, we close our eyes. We pray always that God continues to bless this Parliament, our people, and by extension, our nation. Madam President, I thank you.
Senator Hosein.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, before I begin my contribution on this debate, I would just like to take the opportunity to congratulate Her Excellency, Madam President Paula May Weeks, on her ascension to the highest office in Trinidad and Tobago. And I know this because the UNC, the United National Congress, has been a very proactive party for participation of women in politics, as we have elevated our own political leader as the first female Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam President, I say this because women in politics play a very important role, and not enough is being done in order to protect our women in light of recent issues of killings through domestic violence. And I say that we are Parliament, and I ask that we deem to strengthen our legislation in order to address these issues. And this in itself, Madam President, will increase participation within these chambers, be it the House of Representatives and the Senate, and including women, to join us more and more in these debates, as Senator Mahabir would have advocated. But, Madam President, I say this to now respond to some comments that was made by Senator De Freitas, the Vice President of the Senate, Madam President. I'm compelled because, Madam President, we on this side here, we are a family, Madam President. And when you touch one, Madam President, you touch all. And, Madam President, this motion is one of parliamentary autonomy. After I heard Senator De Freitas, I did not know this was a motion on Senator Mark. So, Madam President, I say that Senator De Freitas, he stated that this legislation should not be rushed at all. But I want to remind the goodly senator that it was since 2003, that is about 15 years ago, we adopted what we call the Latimer Principles. Being a Vice President of the Senate, I would have hoped to hear that you would have used those terms, the Latimer Principles, because that is the foundation of parliamentary autonomy. And, Madam President, he said that we should not rush it. But as a Vice President of the Senate, as a presiding officer in your absence, Madam President, I would have hoped that he would have said that we should advocate. We should advocate for expediency for parliamentary autonomy. Because this, Madam President, is the seat of democracy of Trinidad and Tobago. And unlike the PNM, we are not using this debate as a talk shop. We on this side about action. And our track record for the 5 years in 2010 to 2015 has proven such. Madam President, and I say this because we were able to buy a boat. And I say that because Senator De Freitas, and I welcome his suggestion that we should have debates in Tobago. I think it's a very good idea. But that now begs the question, Madam President, how are we going to reach Tobago? And we can't get back, Madam President. And, Madam President, if we take the new boat, the Galleon's Passage, we will be sailing above the water, open air. And eating yogurt and yogurt and almond milk for tea. And, Madam President, a lot of work has been done here. Senator De Freitas said we are rushing. But, Madam President, there's a JSC was set up for this, and it's in the 5th session, 2014-2015, 10th Parliament, a pre-policy towards an independent Parliament, ensuring Parliament's functional autonomy of the Joint Select Committee appointed to consider and report on the legislative proposal entitled the Draft Houses of Parliament Service Authority Bill 2014. So, Madam President, there's a report. And also, Madam President, there's a draft bill. I hold the bill in my hand. The House of Parliament Service Authority Bill 2014. The groundwork is done. Why can't we now do the work, Madam President? Why are they afraid to do the work? And this begs the question, why is the PNM so afraid of granting Parliament autonomy? Why are you afraid of giving Parliament more power? Because you know why, Madam President? Parliament is the institution in which the executive is held accountable. And we have seen that there have been many dark corners that this government has taken with respect to their governance. So they would never want to strengthen the democracy in this country. And, Madam President, I want to go on to the substantive part of my debate. And that is, I would start off with the general principles of the separation of powers. And Senator De Freitas, Senator Mark, all of them would have gone through the Montesquieu principles with respect to the development of the separation of powers. And the separation of powers itself is enshrined in our Constitution. If we physically examine our Constitution, we would see chapters separate the judiciary from the Parliament, from the executive. And this was given in a judgment, Madam President. They said that the mere structure of our Constitution implies the doctrine of separation of powers. And we all know the locus classicus case on this, the case of Haynes against the Queen, Madam President. 1976, All England Reports 353. And, Madam President, what the essence of that case is that the judiciary must exercise judicial function that the legislature must exercise the legislative function and that the executive must exercise executive function. So, Madam President, if there's all of this separation and all of this case law and all of this doctrine in order for us to operate, I think it's time that we allow all of those things to now materialize so that we have a fully autonomous Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. But this government, Madam President, they seem to mix up separation of powers and separation of personnel. And I say this because it troubled me to no end, Madam President, when a government minister could have read out a search warrant in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam President, that was a spoke, that was a dagger in the heart of our democracy, where a search warrant was read out in this Parliament. And Madam President, I say that when we examine the doctrine or the idea of parliamentary autonomy, there are two areas in which we can look at autonomy. First, we look at financial autonomy, and then we can look at administrative autonomy. And Madam President, I want to start off with the issue of administrative autonomy. And if we look at the draft bill, Madam President, it says, the first paragraph of this bill says, a modern parliament must be administered and managed efficiently and in a manner which ensures the autonomy of the parliament and its staff. The present office of the parliament is part of the public service, and its staff comprises public officers subject to the Public Service Commission. There is no supervision of the office of the parliament by the members of parliament collectively. There is need for greater financial autonomy and to attract and retain highly competent staff. This bill seeks to achieve efficient and autonomous management and administration of Parliament by dismantling and replacing the existing public service model with an independent, non-partisan Houses of Parliament Service Authority, a body corporate to be managed by a board comprising members of Parliament, representative of the government, the opposition, and the independent Senate bench, and chaired by the Speaker. So, Madam President, we are seeing that this is a very progressive debate. This is a debate in which we can actually change the way in which the Parliament operates. And I'm very grateful that I am able to contribute to such a debate. Because when you look at the clauses of this bill, it is very instructive. And if you would permit me, Madam President, when you look at Clause 7 of the bill, it establishes the authority that I just mentioned. When you look at Clause 8, it gives the authority certain powers. And some of those powers are the provision of sufficient clerical staff, attendants, and other staff to enable the Houses of Parliament and committees thereof to operate efficiently. The provision of professional advice on parliamentary procedure and functions of Parliament generally. Provision of dining facilities, care of parliamentary surroundings and the building, security, accurate reporting, library and research facilities and services for members of Parliament. So, Madam President, this is a very important issue in terms of granting the Parliament administrative authority. And when we look at the staffing of the Parliament, I would like to go on record to say that I would like to congratulate the staff of the Parliament. They have been very hardworking, very, very hardworking. Madam President, they have been cut from a different cloth from the rest of the public service. Because all of us in the Senate, I am sure, have experienced the bad end of the public service. And Madam President, when we look at the vacancies in the public service, it's over 9,000. So you can't even fill these vacancies, and now you want to staff Parliament. Give Parliament the power to determine its staff. And there's an article by Gail Alexander from the Trinidad Guardian, published Wednesday, April 26, 2017. And she says, Parbati Maraj, Deputy Director of Personal Administration, said there are approximately 9,000 job vacancies in the service, 4,036 specific vacancies and about 4,551 generic ones. So, Madam President, we're seeing all this inefficiency within the public service and the Public Service Commission. Give Parliament the power. It will actually ease up the work of the Public Service Commission, and it will actually advance the work of the Parliament. Because it takes time to fill those vacancies for advertisement and to go through all of the bureaucracies. When right here in the Parliament, there are specialized duties in which persons have to perform. For example, the duties of the table, which the clerk of the House and the clerk of the Senate has to perform. And I say this, Madam President, because when we look at how a clerk of the House and a clerk of the Senate is appointed, the appointment is made pursuant to Section 121 of the Constitution. The Public Service Commission appoints both the clerk of the Senate and the clerk of the House. And Madam President, do you know that the Prime Minister has the power to veto any appointment of these positions? And Madam President, I think that should not be, because if Parliament is an independent institution, then I believe that the executive should play no role in appointing or deciding who not to appoint as the clerk of the House and the clerk of the Senate. Because, Madam President, the PNM, for far too long, has stretched their long tentacles in every independent institution of this country. And I will give you an example, Madam President. In the case of Firoza Ramjon, do you remember that case? That case was a woman, Firoza Ramjon, a career public servant who gave 38 years of service to her country. Her appointment was vetoed by who? A PNM Prime Minister of this country, Madam President. And Madam President, we must not allow any more of this interference with any public service appointments. And Madam President, I would not say, or I'll leave it for another time, that we have seen that there have been questionable appointments in democratic institutions that govern our country being made and being vetoed, Madam President. I go so far, and I wouldn't say any more on that. But what the bill proposes to do, this authority bill, at clause 23 of that bill, Madam President, it now gives the President the power to appoint the clerk of the House and the clerk of the Senate after consultation between the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, which actually opens up the forum. It puts all the parties at the table in order to determine who the clerk of the Senate and the clerk of the House is. And when we look at the administrative autonomy of this bill, Madam President, the administration of the Parliament requires money. It requires funds to actually work. So the other leg of it is regarding the financial autonomy. And the bill says that the enactment of this bill will also seek to promote the autonomy and efficiency of the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago as established by the Constitution, and to further enhance the high standards of accountability, of transparency, responsibility of the Parliament in the conduct of its business and in line with the Latimer House guidelines for the Commonwealth. And there are three different models with respect to the financial autonomy. And currently in Trinidad and Tobago, our Parliament is akin to what a government ministry would be with respect to its funding and its financing. So that is really deemed as the department model, which is essentially a government department in terms of estimates and relies on specific processes to maintain appropriate regard for the needs of a Parliament compared with normal government institutions. So the Parliament currently operates as a subset of the executive, because when it's budget time, the clerk of the House, who's the accounting officer, would have to prepare the estimates and go over to the Ministry of Finance, and then the Minister of Finance, the technocrats, they will sift through the estimates and then determine the budget for Parliament. But, Madam President, if this happens, is our Parliament truly independent if the executive is still determining the funding of the Parliament? And what the bill actually seeks to do, it increases the level of financial autonomy because it establishes a bank account or a fund in which the monies are to be paid to the Parliament. And the procedure in which the funds are actually appropriated to the Parliament is that the estimates of the expenditure for each financial year are prepared by the clerk, which happens now, but it's reviewed and agreed upon by a board, and then it's laid in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And Madam President, that board actually comprised of the Speaker of the House and also some of the government MPs and also the senators, Madam President. So therefore, we can see that the Parliament itself and its officers are actually determining the budget in which it requires to efficiently conduct its business. And when we look at other jurisdictions, we see, for example, in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, in Kenya, in New Zealand, there are similar models in which they have a level of financial autonomy, which is similar to what this bill actually proposes. And Madam President, I reach a point in my debate now that the Minister of Labour, in her contribution, she had stated in her debate that, and I quote from the Hansard, that I want to seize the opportunity to remind my goodly colleague, she was referring to Senator Mark, that it was the People's National Movement that built every single institution of democracy in Trinidad and Tobago. Every single one. I dare him to call one institution that the UNC has built in this country. Madam President, I am going to call out all the institutions of democracy that the UNC has built in this country. I'll try, Senator Ramdeen, I'll try. And in 2002, Madam President, the UNC manifesto, it actually says that with a view of good governance, the transparent and accountable management of all resources of a country for its sustainable economic and social development, of which the fight against corruption is an important dimension. And Madam President, the list that I'm going to call out is a non-exhaustive list. The UNC passed and enacted the Freedom of Information Act, Act 26 of 1999. Madam President, this act gave the public unprecedented access to government information and records. The provision of the acts give members of the public the statutory right to access official documents from any public authority.
That is democracy.
The legislation not only made government more accountable and transparent, but also provides a powerful weapon in combating corruption and nepotism. That is one institution that the UNC has built. Madam President, number two, the Integrity in Public Life Act, Madam President. It strengthens and empowers the Integrity Commission to exercise greater control and oversight over the financial and ethical conduct of all persons performing government function. But you know what the PNM government did, Madam President? They frustrated for several years the approval of the declaration form under the Integrity in Public Life Act. And there's an article, Madam President. It's dated Friday, 15th August, 2003 by Sean Douglas. It's entitled, Ramesh Tells Maureen to Resign Over Integrity Act. Former Attorney General Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj has accused the government of acting illegally by refusing to enforce integrity laws and has called on the Attorney General, Glenda Maureen, to resign for allegedly frustrating the Integrity Commission in monitoring official assets. Madam President, that is the track record of the PNM. While we are trying to open up transparency in the government, you all are frustrating it. Madam President, when we look at the Constitution Amendment Bill, Parliamentary Committee Act 29 of 1999, and the Minister of Trade is signed relief, because under all of these legislation, she now has to be accountable to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. When we amended Section 66 of the Constitution, Madam President, the UNC government gave life to joint select committees of Parliament, Madam President. We take ownership of that, Madam President, because that was a project of a United National Congress government. And what has GSCs been able to do in this country? They have been able to expose corruption at the highest level in this country. We have seen the Sea Bridge, Madam President. Every time I probably stand up here, I speak about the Sea Bridge because it is a mess. It is in a crisis. Just yesterday, Senator Small unveiled the corruption. Well, I wouldn't say corruption.
Let me just put a little hold there to what you're saying. There's a public dimension to the Joint Select Committee that sat yesterday, but I would ask you not to make any sort of come to any conclusion about anything, okay?
All I would just say
okay, no, that's fine. Just have a seat. Let me just finish. So that is just my caution to you. You can proceed.
Thank you. And Madam President, I will leave it as there because that information is in the public domain, right? What happened with Caribbean Airlines. And Madam President, when we look also what the UNC did, we passed the Judicial Review Act, number 60 of 2000. Madam President, this act is a powerful tool in order to review the decisions of public officials. It's a sword. Yeah. It allows individuals or groups to bring action which may be in the public interest, although they were not directly affected by the particular injustice also. That is the wide dimension and scope that this act have, because the UNC has always been a progressive government, notwithstanding whichever incarnation that we governed in, Madam President. Madam President, we also enacted the Equal Opportunity Act, number 69 of 2000, Madam President. And that act, for the first time in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, established an Equal Opportunities Commission. It is an administrative and investigative body entrusted with the responsibility of working towards the elimination of discrimination, Madam President. But when we passed that act, you know what the PNM did, Madam President? They went to the High Court to declare that act as being unconstitutional, Madam President. Then the former Attorney General, Ramesh Lawrence Maraj, had to respond, Madam President. This PNM government has delayed the enactment of the implementation of the Equal Opportunities Act, Madam President. And one other issue that this PNM has been labeled for is we must all remember what happened with former Speaker of the Parliament, Oka Sipol. Madam President, a former Speaker of this House, a presiding officer, was placed under house arrest by the PNM. House arrest, you know, Madam President. Right? And you know what the former Speaker wants to do? She contemplated filing legal action. And you know who were the MPs involved there, Madam President? MP Ken Valley, MP Wendell Motley, and you know who else? Our Prime Minister. Prime Minister Keith Rowley was all part of that, Madam President. But Madam President, they will say what they want. The track record, our track record speaks for itself. As former Education Minister Hazel Manning said, facts are a stubborn thing. They are very hard to go away.
Very hard.
And when we give Parliament all this autonomy, Madam President, we must bear a certain level of responsibility. And this responsibility not only lies at the feet of the staff of this Parliament, but every single one of us, be it elected MPs, government senators, opposition senators, independent senators, Madam President. And we must sit here in this chamber and we must be role models for the youth of Trinidad and Tobago. We must serve with the highest honor and we must have impeccable character. But Madam President, we must never forget when emails were read out in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, false emails, Madam President, fake emails. The police said so, and I didn't say so, Madam President. That also, Madam President, was an erosion of the democracy of this country. It was an abuse of Parliament privilege. We have been granted a privilege in this Parliament, and we must use it responsibly. And whatever happened at the last Parliament, Madam President, should never happen in the history of this country again. Because the police, you know what the police said, Madam President? The police said that they have completed their investigation into the email gate.
Senator, you have to quote your source, please.
Madam President, it's the Trinidad Express, December 18, 2017, titled Cops Wind Up Email Gate Probe. Quote, police have completed their investigation into email gate, but nothing of substance has come out of it. Madam President, that is a sinister move. It was one of the biggest con jobs in this country to accuse a former prime minister and members of cabinet of conspiracy to murder, Madam President. That is the abuse of Parliament. And while I'm on the topic of accountability, and I said that when I opened my debate that Parliament is responsible for ensuring accountability and openness, and there are various ways in which we can hold the executive to account, such as question time, matters on the adjournment. We have motions, Madam President. I want to say that there has been a trend with this government, in not only this place, but in another place, Madam President, where when we ask questions, we are not getting answers, Madam President. So I did a research, and my research turned up to show that it's on a website called Open Democracy. It's an online article titled, Why Don't Politicians Answer Questions? 18th March 2015 by Mr. Benjamin Young. I want to read this article, Madam President. And he says, so why don't politicians answer the question? There are, I believe, two reasons. First, they are afraid. To give a straight answer to a difficult question is to put yourself at the mercy of a brutally unforgiving media environment. Your every word is being scrutinized by journalists, commentators, and hostile party operatives from across this political spectrum. The second reason is that politicians don't think people will notice. It is drummed into them that a parade of advisors and media men, that the only thing that matters is message discipline. Get your talking points out at any cost. The audience remembers what you say, not what the question was. And that is a trend, Madam President, that we have seen developing in this Parliament. And we as a responsible opposition has so far prosecuted various issues in this Parliament, and we have unveiled corruption, mismanagement, nepotism of this PNM government. And I ask that if you are serious about strengthening the democracy of this country, that you give Parliament the power, that you give Parliament the power of administrative autonomy, that you give Parliament the powers of financial autonomy, and that you pay respect to the United National Congress for what we have done in this country with respect to strengthening the democracy of this country. And Madam President, with these few words, I would like to end my contribution. Thank you.
Senator Ramkissoon.
Thank you, Madam President. I must say that we are having quite a passionate debate, and it is great to have a passionate debate about Parliament autonomy. And I want to say congratulations to Senator Mark for bringing this motion not once, twice, but a third time. And I didn't realize that it had come up because I have been preparing for this debate since last year. And I didn't realize. So it is good that I have been given the opportunity to speak on this given Private Members Day on this particular motion. And many persons don't understand the effects of Private Members Day. Sometimes it takes about 6 months to complete a motion brought under the private members' standing order. And I do remember that Senator Mark had graciously given me one of his Private Members Day to complete one motion that I had brought, and only 3 persons could have contributed. So it's not always as simple as we would like it, or make it sound that, you know, it's going to be quickly, we're bringing a lot of motions and it will be finished, but no. So I am grateful to have this opportunity to speak about Parliament autonomy today. I could not have probably put it better than Senator Mahabir on all the aspects of Parliament life of an independent senator. I've heard many from both sides talk about the political arena or being a politician. I never define myself as a politician because when we all attend a concert, Madam President, we are not part of the band, we're not performers, but so we cannot say that we might be in the political arena, but we are not politicians. Well, I believe I am not, as an independent senator, I am not a politician. I stand here firstly to be an independent voice for legislation that is before us and to serve as an oversight function in all the areas that I have been selected to serve. So, Madam President, for the listening public and for you and for members who are with us, what is Parliament autonomy? What it is in a nutshell is basically Parliament having the responsibility of choosing its own staff. It's basically to also have control over its own budget. So that simply means that the executive should not judge or cut funds for resources required by Parliament to carry out its parliamentary functions. And thirdly, the organization of its own business, which is where the Parliament can set debate times, debate days, and not have the majority voice say how long we sit in Parliament at any given time is what we face today. So, Madam President, the question would be asked, why should we have a reform? Do we really need this reform? And this is not a new conversation. We have been having this conversation in public since 2000. So what is the need, or why should we make this step forward? And parliamentary currently depends on the executive or the government to appoint staff or for its financial resources. And we do see that we have an acting clerk of the Senate for almost 2 years or even more. So all of these things tie into this parliamentary autonomy and how this business is done. And I do truly hold the opinion that Parliament staff should not have to carry out the responsibility of oversight for any government, but the elected and appointed members of Parliament should hold this responsibility. And, Madam President, I do want to talk about the strategic plan of the Parliament of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, which was from 2013 to 2018. And it was the first strategic plan of the Parliament. And the vision was by 2018, or the vision is, sorry, because we're still in 2018, by 2018 to be a modern Parliament that fulfills its constitutional duties to its fullest extent and effectively serves the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The Parliament strategic plan in the period of 2013 and 2018 states that the Parliament, it belongs not only to parliamentarians, but it is also owned by all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And I do believe that we are presently very modern. We have all our joint select committees televised. We have our sittings live. We are there. And I do believe Senator De Freitas did mention how we have evolved as a parliament and what we are doing presently and the good work that our parliament is currently doing to inform the public and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, we even have persons who walk up to us on a daily basis, like for myself, where I work. I would have co-workers talk about the programs aired on the Parliament channel, even so much they are very invigorated and intrigued by some of the debates that are before the houses, and as well as they are very much learning that the Parliament debates are more than the flashes on the 7 o'clock news where they have the fight scenes. So they are very proud to learn more about what parliamentarians or MPs are saying about the present or the future of our country. So this is something that is something that we should be very much aware of as parliamentarians. Now, the aim of a modern parliament is to allow members of parliament to fulfill their legislative, oversight, and representation functions effectively, despite where they may sit. One of the major roles that we as MPs actively do is we do the administrative, or we hold the administration accountable through the various joint select committees and through debates, for example, the budget debates where we speak openly about the monies distributed for the different sectors. With that saying, the caution is to ensure that these functions should be done without government interference. Or may I say, continue to be without government interference. And that is the key point. Whilst we are here at the point when we do not have government interference, we as a parliament can say this is the time to implement laws or legislation in relation to parliament autonomy. because we do not have the issues where MPs are consumed by power or using their powers irresponsibly or having to discharge their duties irresponsibly. So that's why we could embrace, and that's why all the MPs can say yes to such a motion or yes to such parliament autonomy. But when we allow it to slip and no one knows what the future holds, that then will put our citizens and our country at a risk because we do not know who may occupy the future office of our country. So that is why I believe this motion brought forward by Senator Mark is truly an important one. It is one that needs to have its seriousness allocated, and definitely the recommendations put forward to transition to autonomous parliament is one that we should do now. And some of the recommendations would be simply to have the staff of the parliament not selected by the Public Service Commission, and Senator Hosein outlined the shortcomings of the present Public Service Commission, and to have the staff of the parliament selected for the services that they unpaid for the services they presently provide. I have to say also that members of parliament, the staff that we have here, it is truly raising the bar for public servants. The Ministry of Labor can look at this, but the members of staff for parliament can have the item where they could probably train persons before they go into the public service. Because no one could say anything negative about greeting a member of staff from parliament to get any information when they have tours, Madam President, anything that they would like. Even though they work these long hours, they will meet you with a greeting, professionalism, and with a sense of pride for their country. And that is something we have to say, that is what a public servant is all about. So they are truly an example that the whole country can learn from. So, Madam President, another recommendation to put forward for an autonomous parliament is having adequate resources for government and non-government members. And Senator Mahabir spoke about this at length, and I would suggest that his recommendations truly be taken for research assistance, library resources, all of these items, because it has so much merit to the growth of our parliament. The third point for recommendation, I want to endorse what Senator Amin spoke about, which is the budget of the parliament should really be a percentage of the national budget similar to that of the Tobago House of Assembly. So they are allocated about 4%. I don't see any harm in also allocating a percentage, if it's 4% or 3%, to the parliament staff to also carry out their functions and take away the executive arm or having that under the Ministry of Finance. I think that's a very noteworthy recommendation. Madam President, on another note, I did mention earlier that this is not new. There is a lot of literature review on this particular topic on parliament autonomy related to Trinidad and Tobago. So I was very pleased that Senator Mark did amend this particular motion, because initially I did not support having this done in 3 months when we were at the end of the parliamentary term. And then also looking at the amount of work that was already done on this given topic, I didn't understand why, again, we want to go to a joint select committee when this has already gone to a joint select committee in the past. And then, well, I saw he amended it to have it introduce legislation by April 30th, 2018. And I want to state that this Senator Mark is very ambitious because of the findings from the 5th session, 2014-2015, of the 10th Parliament Joint Select Committee. And for those who have not gotten the time to read it, I'd just like to summarize what I learned from that Joint Select Committee that dealt with the draft houses of the Parliament Service Authority Bill 2014, and they also looked at the parliamentary expert on governance, Dr. Patterson's information. They also looked at the pre-policy paper. So all of this was before a Joint Select Committee of Parliament. They had even received 13 written responses from the public. The meetings, however, Madam President, I have no idea why, because I did not sit in the 10th Parliament, but the meetings were not, I repeat, not well attended by members of Parliament, despite the public display that their support for Parliament autonomy. They were not adequately or well attended. The public meetings, which appeared to be stakeholder review sessions, were cancelled due to a lack of quorum. The reports were not signed. The Joint Select Committee report, that is, was not signed by all members of the committee appointed to serve on that Joint Select Committee to review Parliament autonomy and the legislation that we are asking, or Senator Mark is asking to introduce. There was no reasons given by the members who did not sign because there was not a minority report submitted. So we do not know why these reports were not supported to this date. The reports were signed by some, and it was a bit interesting for me to note that of all the meetings that the committee did hold, 2 members never attended, for reasons of being excused, and that was the Honorable Colum Imbert and Mr. Robert Griffith, which I also found interesting because on the 21st of March 2014, when this was debated in that time in the House of the House of Representatives, the comment was made by Mr. Imbert that no serious person could have any objection to the principles enunciated in these legislative proposals. We just need time to tweak them a little bit to see if we can really achieve the objective of true independence, so I support the measure that it goes to a Joint Select Committee. Unfortunately, the given member was unable to attend any of the Joint Select Committees, even though he was a part of it. And to add, did not submit a reason why he did not sign off on the report. So it is now interesting to have a motion about the same legislation proposal and not know if the government was able, the present government, I have to say, because they were not in government at that time, if the present government has any items to tweak, if they do have any items that they would like to change, or are they just going to not use this piece of legislation at all and come with something new? And that's what I thought I would have learned sitting in a motion such as this. What is happening is because it's not laid before us presently. There's many pieces of bills laid before us, and Parliament autonomy is not one. I understand it's a promise, and we welcome it, but I cannot see it being the one that Senator Mark is referring to or referencing, because the government made a stance then that this needs some work. And I would agree that it had some items that needed work, because whilst I read some of it, Madam President, the bill spoke about a board composition of 5 government, 2 opposition, and 2 independents of government, how Parliament operates. And for me, I'm not sure if that really gives a very independent voice to the Parliament, because yes, it will be chaired by the Speaker, but I don't know if it's a better alternative for a running administration of the Parliament. So simple things like that may have been ventilated in the Joint Select Committee, but it was not brought forward. And to say that we are at the junction where the motion says that it should be introduced by 30th of April 2018, I'm not certain if that can materialize given the facts that are before us. So, Madam President, with that, I would like to move to something a little bit, something related, but on a different point. And that is in relation to the United Nations Development Report that was done 2012 to 2013. And we spent a significant amount of funds on it, and that is the $4,322,000 US to find out about strengthening the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And it was something that I felt had some benefit. And it had some really nice statistical data that was done in that study. But the only thing, Madam President, is a bit outdated because we're now in 2018. And this is data that was for 2012 to 2013 period. And the aim of that report was to have an effective public participation in governance structures at all levels. It also had to look at an outcome of governance structures and practices and how responsive they are. And this, Madam President, I must say, this is for Trinidad and Tobago. Sometimes we talk about studies that are done. This one is specific to the Parliament, strengthening the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the expected outcomes of this particular study was that it's going to provide a comprehensive strategic development plan of Parliament and have a multi-year product and have enhanced legislative function and outreach and communication. And it's a completed legislative proposal with order papers and functions of autonomy of Parliament that is independent. So we did do some studies on this. And the information shared in this study was that members of Parliament or backbench members of Parliament was not sufficient, or we didn't have adequate numbers to serve in all these different joint select committees set up. And that was one of the items or weaknesses it had suggested, because many different areas have a lot of backbenchers, and they can't serve in these joint select committees with a level of priority and giving a lot of their time. But in our Parliament, we did not have that, because we have, for example, in the Senate, we are appointed, we are part-time. I have a full-time job. It is not close to Port of Spain. And I'm expected to be here once per week for debates, once per week for joint select committee, because thankfully my coordinator was understanding and I serve on one joint select committee, but I now serve on 2 joint select committees for the amendment of legislation, which is cybercrime and gambling. So now I have 3 joint select committees and 1 day for sitting. And now this honorable leader of government has said they are doubling up, so 2 days. So I have probably to be here 4 days a week, Madam President, out of 5 working days in the week. I am very grateful that my employers have had some compassion on me. They did pull the 1994 policy on me to say it that, in 1994, Madam President, we're in 2018, and the 1994 policy stated that MPs or members of Parliament who are appointed should only be permitted 5 days time off. And obviously you'll be allowed more if your management allows it. But in 1994, we did not have all these joint select committees. We didn't have double days of sittings. And we really didn't have this heavy workload. So it's very sad that they did pull the 1994 policy for me. But the fact remains, I would not agree that this is truly a part-time job. If we are to give that dedication and that commitment, yes, it's commitment to service, but to give that added additional oversight view for legislation before us, as well as committees where we meet these different enterprises and advise on what we read and what we hear and ask them about it. And I think it's something that I warmly welcome, but it's also, we need to understand what is fair, what is right, what is, makes sense. And we do have a report that states this clearly, and it spoke about the small pool of parliamentarians and the select committee members as well as the number of entities that we have. And I believe the Constitution speaks about certain joint select committees are mandatory. So they also have that kind of added information that is needed. And then also now this is going to impact on your financial aspect of the Parliament. I mean, we are taking it for granted, but every time you serve, oh, sorry, yes, I'm going to give way.
Just for my own edification.
Sure.
Let us assume we go the way of full-time senators, and you are a young professional in the energy sector, I presume well paid.
Paid.
And you have the option to be appointed as senator for 5 years. Would you leave your job? Because these are the factors that has to be taken into consideration when we draft legislation of this nature.
Thank you, Madam President. Senator Khan, I have 10 more minutes before tea, but okay, I had a point. He preempted. No, I really was going down that road because no, full-time versus part-time is a key part in parliamentary autonomy that no one has spoken about, and that is a true aspect that is really something that needs to be ventilated properly. And who you attract to occupy these seats and hold these positions, and what is the benefits versus, for me, for example, who is a professional, as you put it, in the oil and gas, it is something that when you are asked to serve, you as a person needs to say, you need to prioritize what. I cannot speak for all the professionals in my field, but trust me, there are people who would say this is the most important job to any other job out there. And they would believe, because now you would have the full-time. For example, if I was a full-time senator, I would look at all those energy legislation that is 1960, 1950 with cranes. We don't have legislation on cranes. Well, Madam President, we're straying a little bit. But the fact is, we don't have legislation that addresses these things, and people are at risk every day. And this is what I would have dedicated my time and energy if I was a full-time senator. So, Madam President, I am sorry that we did stray a little bit, but I didn't want persons to come away that mechanical engineers will not serve in this position because we are paid better in the oil and gas sector. Yes, we are. I am paid better than the salary, and it is a sacrifice of oneself. I always believe standing here is service to people, sacrificing oneself, because this is what I do in my part-time life. All the research, all the extra reading, because I have to catch up with Senator Mark and his time, all his years of experience as speaker, reading all the documentation. I have to play catch up to know all of the information before I could speak on any motion or any bill that is before us. So, Madam President, another easy one is something that Senator Mark, or Senator Khan, sorry, don't close the door on it. If you are able to make a direct impact in your field in an office such as that, you would give of yourself 100%. Just like how you occupy a role of a minister. You're not a part-time minister, you're full-time. So it is really based on your exposure. So, Madam President, with that, I want to make a little side comment on that, and that is separation of powers. I personally believe it is very difficult for senators to hold ministerial positions, and that is because it's very difficult to cut off or to not be part of a cabinet decision and then now have to exercise an oversight function. I think it is very much difficult to have that separation of powers, because how now are you part of the initiation or part of the decision making and now coming before us in the Senate to talk about a bill that you were part of saying yes to? It does impact on your oversight functions as a senator, be it government or whatever area. It is a difficult one. So, Madam President, I did have a quote from for Senator Khan's question in my debate, and I would refer him to the United Nations Development Program 2015 and page 5, which does give the different scenarios of full-time versus part-time and how it would benefit us as a parliament to have the full-time senators. If we are happy with what we are and where we are right now, then so be it. But whatever we bring forward, we need to ensure that is not only for us, but it's for the future. I have spoken about that. Right now, we don't have the abuse of duties by any member of parliament, so that way we can warmly embrace parliament autonomy and having legislation to affect, to impact or to initiate such. Madam President, with 5 minutes before tea, I do want to speak about one little point, and Senator Dookie mentioned it at the last time we were able to debate this, and that is the use of ICT technology. And Madam President, we have Parliament staff here all till the end of our sitting. So if we're sitting at 1:30 to 10, they are here from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I find this a little bit difficult to understand when we do not need a full staff present. For example, library staff, they can work at home. There's VPN, which is a virtual proxy network. Did I say the correct term? Virtual private network, sorry, VPN, which allows you to remote into your laptop or your computer from the warmth of your home and do whatever any MP may want. So we can look at different sections within Parliament to see which ones we need a full staff for and where we don't need a full staff. We could have a skeleton staff after the hours of 4, so we don't have a strain on the budget, strain on person's health, and just having an abuse of that because we are not here from 8 a.m. And Madam President, that was one of the recommendations I wanted to put forward, to think of the staff that we have here and how we could easily assist them in executing their duties before having this legislation before us and brought forward. And Madam President, part of the parliamentary autonomy that I would like to see brought forward is the transferring of knowledge. I would like to see past MPs, now Senator De Freitas said he's inhaling, so he is not new. For persons who have excelled, I would like them to continue to mentor the new ones who are coming on board. I would like them to still serve, and I would like a provision in the Parliament be set up to have persons who no longer hold members of Parliament assist in grooming and mentoring the new and young MPs who are more than willing to serve their country. This is part of the Parliament that I think would have a lot of benefits. We see it being done in the Youth Parliament, and now we want to extend it not only to youth, but the actual different houses of Parliament that sits. Madam President, I am so looking at the time. I do have a closing part of it. So before tea, let me just say that there's a lot that we as MPs face and do. And we want to ensure that we are all treated equally, regardless of who may sit in the chair. I may not be here, so whoever occupies Parliament positions or parliamentarian positions and hold executive power, they should always have this level of fairness and level of a standard to which they work. And that's why we have laws, that's why we have regulations to keep members or persons intact. Because sometimes we like to use the term protocol very loosely, and we're not sure what that protocol is. So we're just trying to determine terms and conditions that we can all say yes to and we can all be comfortable with, regardless of whoever occupies the position in which the executive arm is controlling. Madam President, how much more time do I have?
Ramkissoon, until 4:30, you would have used up 33 minutes. So after the break, you can resume because you'll have 7 more minutes.
Okay, well, I'll take, 15 seconds before tea, and I would use my 7 minutes just to tie it all in and just give my closing statements about parliamentary autonomy. As I said, I have been preparing for this since last year. So I do thank you, Madam President.
Honourable Senators, at this juncture, we will suspend the sitting and we will return and resume at 5 p.m. Senator Ramkissoon, you'll have 7 minutes.